Well, I've wanted to have this conversation for a while. I'm somebody who doesn't really know a whole lot about astrology, but I want to. I want to know more. So I wanted to interview Natha Campanella. She is a podcaster, a writer, a teacher, a life coach, and an experienced astrologer who's really going to give us the Cole's notes. She's really going to give us the sort of astrology 101 that a lot of us might be looking for, right? What's Mercury retrograde? What is that? What are all these sun signs and rising signs and the houses and the elements? And she's really going to help to break it down so that we can all understand ourselves a little bit better. So here we go with Natha Campanella. Oh my goodness, I'm so excited to have this conversation, really doing a deep dive into astrology, really helping us with Astrology 101 for newbies like me and for so many people out there that just don't have a clue about astrology. So welcome, Natha Campanella.
Hi, Sarah. I'm really excited to be here and talk about this with you today.
I am beyond excited. You and I have known each other for a little while through a mutual friend of ours, Ellen Atkins, who owns the Suburban Monk. And of course, she has gotten so into astrology over the last few years. And she's really inspired me to start looking at it more deeply. I've always known my sun sign or my zodiac sign is Scorpio. And that's kind of where it ended for me. And I just know that everyone's talking about Mercury in retrograde and everyone's talking about the houses and your rising sign and where the moon was when you were born and all of these things. And I think a lot of us are a lot intimidated by astrology. And so I wanted to have you on because of just how amazing you are. You've been an astrologist now for, several years. And I wanted to have you on to just really kind of, deconstruct it, demystify it for us and help walk us through what you think is important for us to know when it comes to astrology. So I'm going to pass it over to you. And I'd love for you to just kind of walk us through what you think we need to know as newbies.
Okay, sounds good. So yeah, astrology is really gaining momentum. 20 years ago, when you would talk about going to an astrologer, people might think you were crazy or they might really not have any interest in that. It wasn't particularly relevant. And I think for many years, it's been looked at like it's kind of woo-woo. But there's a lot of value and merit to some of these things that have been dismissed as they're coming into fashion. And I think astrology is really big right now because it is so accurate. And, we hear about our sun signs, and when we're reading horoscopes, those are mostly based around sun signs. And the reason I think that astrology initially can have a little bit of it can seem a little flaky to people is that, it is hard to read a sun sign and apply it to millions of people, right? How can we possibly say these 5 characteristics fit everybody in this group? And, the thing about astrology is, yes, it's a really big map. And I think that's also why people get intimidated is that it is a map that is, you look at a chart and it's gibberish. It's just symbols. And, it's hard to just understand. It's not super intuitive. But
it's really not intuitive. In fact, you've done my chart and just even showing me what it looks like. And I've had my chart done in the past, but even looking at it, it's intimidating. Like these are things that we don't learn in school. These are ideas that we just are not talked to about. And so I think we all just look at it and just have no clue what it means and then just kind of file it away or, listen to what the person said, but really don't have a real understanding of what's underneath it. So that's what I love about what you do is you really demystify it. And you're right. I think a lot of people read their horoscope in the newspaper and sure, we can pull little bits and pieces from here or there, but how accurate really is that?
Yeah. Yeah. So astrology, when we're talking about reading a chart, which is what a professional astrologer can do for you in an astrology reading, is that we enter your birth data, which is your birth date, your birth location, and your time of birth into a computer system, and it generates a chart. And it's a map of where all of the planets were in the sky at the moment of your birth. And each planet is assigned a human archetype. And I say archetype like it's one thing, but really they are vast descriptions, really personality descriptions. And, I honestly cannot explain to you why astrology works the way that it does, but every time that I'm reading for a client, they're understanding, they're making sense of the information. So basically, I'm just translating the archetypes. And I'm saying, so for you, you have a Scorpio sun. So I can begin by translating what the archetype of Scorpio is and what the archetype of the moon is. And I'm asking you as my client to listen and to just listen to the words, not necessarily focus on the sun or Scorpio or the map, but just listen to what I'm saying and listen for how it relates to your life. Because my job as an astrologer really is to, act as a guide to help you see yourself more clearly.
And so I guess the underlying, when we get started with it is that wherever we are in the world, wherever we're birthed into the world, that's a magical moment. That's a unique moment, your date, your time of birth, and where in the world you were born is very special and very unique to each and every individual.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's your astrology chart is really the map of this lifetime for you. What you have come in to learn, what your soul is wanting to master, as well as some of the potential crises that you may run into, some of your gifts, your talents, even the people that you will eventually end up in relationship with, the quality of your relationships. I mean, it can be very, very precise in what it has to tell you. But, there is fate and destiny, but there's also free will. And so we can look at a chart and read for some of the fate and destiny and say, these are the things that you can potentially run up against. These are some of your brick walls. But we also have free will. And so it's not to say that this is exactly what's going to happen to you and you have no choice. It's saying, this is a potential brick wall. You can handle it any myriad of ways. You can, walk up to it and feel it and then back away. You can crash into it. It's up to you. But, this is what your soul has come in to learn. And these are some of the routes that are going to be presented to you to learn those things.
I love the way it sounds because, as you know about my work, is that it's all about raising our awareness around who we are and the things that we do habitually, our behaviors, the actions that we take in our lives. And so it's kind of like understanding it's another modality. It's another tool in our toolbox to be able to understand ourselves better and to go a little bit more deeply under the surface so that then when things come up in our lives, we can sort of say, well, yeah, that makes sense that that's there. And now I'm able to have just more awareness around it to attack it differently or to adapt to it differently or to behave with it differently. I think that it's just, again, another way of raising our awareness. So I love the way that astrology, can work in that way.
Yeah, it is a really validating tool. And I always say that, my job is to teach you how to use the wisdom of astrology in your emotional health toolkit. Because we know ourselves pretty well. We spend 24 hours a day with ourselves, but there are a lot of things that are still unconscious to us that we don't see. We get caught up, we miss the boat, we have our projections. But with astrology, and especially if you have, a good astrologer, that astrologer can objectively look at your chart and say, this is probably happening. And then when we get that feedback, it's like we can go into ourselves and say, oh yes, that is happening. That's exactly what's happening. And then we have this whole other bit of understanding that we can then work with. Like you said, it's when we're awakening, we need all the tools we can get.
Yeah, definitely. So you kind of touched on something that I'd like to ask you. How do we choose to work with an astrologer? What are we looking for? Like, I know I was sharing with you before we started recording that when I'm looking for a personal trainer, I like somebody who has a background in kinesiology or who is an exercise physiologist, somebody who really understands the body fundamentally, who's not just taken a weekend course and gotten certified. And, I really want them to have experience and have a real understanding. What are we looking for when it comes to working with a professional astrologer?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is that you want to find somebody who you sort of resonate with what they have to say. So let's say you're looking online and, as simplistic as it sounds, you want to really like what they have to write about. Astrologers, first of all, astrology is incredibly personal, and you can get as much or as little out of a reading as you want. But if you are willing to really open up your perspective and allow an astrologer to share the real stuff, right? Because some of the stuff that we're avoiding it for a reason. It's hurtful. We don't want to necessarily look at our addictions, and we don't want to look at why we're pulling in the same kinds of relationships over and over that are unfulfilling, because a lot of that rests on our shoulders. Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, we would like to blame everybody else and say, oh, this person has treated me terribly. But the truth is that we bring our own stuff to the table. And a good astrologer can kind of gently, kindly call you out on that a little bit. And so you want to make sure that you're working with somebody who you trust, right, to open up to. Because if you have an astrologer where you have an instant wall and your arms are crossed and you don't want to hear it, then you're not going to get as much out of the reading. But I think also equally as important is that, some astrologers can read from a really doom and gloom perspective. I don't do predictive astrology. I just feel like I'm not going to be accurate if I'm going to tell you you're going to get married in 5 years, or, so you have to be careful, watch out. I've heard some horror stories from my clients who have seen people who have seen astrologers where the astrologers are trying to sell them, you have a spell that's been cast on you and you need to buy this crystal and keep it in your pocket no, that to me is nonsense. And I don't want to work with somebody that is going to try to scare me, because my own brain can pull in plenty of fear stuff. So, you want to make sure it's somebody, for example, on my website, I have a list of here's what you can expect from a reading with me. And my readings tend to be, because I have been life coaching for so long, and because I've been doing my own interpersonal work for as many years as I have, my readings are astrological, but there's also some, I'm holding space and I'm kind of holding up a mirror, and there's a lot more personal work that comes. That's not for everybody. I had one client who I had to refund their money, because when I sent an intake, and when they sent me back, they were very clear that they did not want to look at any of their historical stuff. They didn't want to talk about their family, their parents. They didn't want to talk about their past relationships. And I thought, okay, I'm not going to be very helpful, because that is part of what I do, is that we're looking at this entire picture of how did you get to where you are now? How can you use where you've been to move forward to where you want to go? So that was a very long-winded way of answering your question, but did that answer your question?
Oh my gosh. I think that it really is all about resonance. Mm-hmm. I think that for each and every person, they just are going to have to find somebody that resonates with them. And like you say, usually a website is, the voice that's being used there, the examples, the things that we're, looking to learn from our astrologer. I think that's going to be pretty much answered. And then probably in the first few minutes of a reading or of a conversation, maybe you have like a discovery call or something where you chat with people. I don't know if that's part of what you do, but I feel like that's what I think people need to know, is that they need to feel comfortable with that person. And I guess there are some people that maybe don't want to go deeper, and okay, then I guess they can work with people that don't want to do that. But if you're looking to go deeper and to really use this as a tool to understand yourself better, you want to be able to, open up and be comfortable with your astrologer for sure.
Yeah. And you want to make sure too that, like you said, it's not that there is anything wrong with getting a reading from somebody that's new at astrology. They'll still probably be able to give you some real nuggets of wisdom. But I do think that the more educated an astrologer is, and the more tools that they have, so whether that is, they have a bachelor's degree in psychology or a life coaching certification, or they have, they're attuned to Reiki, like whatever it is, know that the more of those things that an astrologer has, along with some really in-depth training, the better reading you're going to get, just because we're bringing in all of these modalities in to support the client, to support you.
Yeah, totally makes sense. So I'm wondering, for a first timer, let's say someone's never ever been to an astrology before, they need to have their birth date, the place that they were born, and the time of their birth. That's really important, right? And do they need anything else going in? Is there anything else that we need if we're going to be meeting with you, let's say for the first time? Is there anything else you need from us?
No, that's it. Other than a quiet place to do the reading and to absorb the information, that's really it. And, an exact birth time is really important. But if you do not have that, we can still read a lot of your chart. Mm-hmm. So, I've had a lot of clients who just were bummed for years because their mother, the hospital didn't report a birth time or whatever, but there's still plenty that we can read. But a birth time allows us to read the rising sign and the moon sign. And when we don't have a birth time, those things we don't have the access to those particular interpretations.
So let's talk about that lingo that I think that really intimidates a lot of us. So sun sign used interchangeably with zodiac sign. So Scorpio, Pisces, Libra, all of the 12 that we've all heard of. And then you were saying moon sign and rising sign. So let's do a little bit of, Astrology 101 and break down some of that lingo for us so that we understand what we're talking about.
Yeah. So, I think that we all have a general idea of the 12 signs, and every month the sun changes signs, and that becomes our sun sign. So where the sun, what the sign of the sun when we were born. So right now the sun is in the sign of Sagittarius. That means everybody born right now is going to have a Sagittarius sun. You have a Scorpio sun. I have a Taurus sun. But we also have all of these other planets that are in the sky. And all of those planets are in different signs as well. And so it becomes this whole map. So the sun, the moon, and the rising, I think I always read those as some of the most important places in the zodiac, signs in the zodiac, because they're the most personal. So for example, the sun, and the reason that we can read a sun sign horoscope and feel a little resonance is because, the sun is it's like who we are. It's a point of identity, but it's what gives us joy, what gives us vitality. It's who we are when we're not worried about conditioning or programming or pleasing or approval. It's just who we are in our heart and in our soul. And, it's the sort of the quality of our self-expression. That's a sun sign.
Now, not to interrupt you, but you've mentioned, so the sun,
mm-hmm.
and then you've mentioned then you've mentioned planets. So the sun is a star, and then we're talking Pluto, so, you're talking Saturn, Uranus, so how does the planetary alignment fit in with your reading?
So, I explained a little bit to you before we started recording that there are all of these layers that we kind of read for in astrology. Another reason why it's intimidating to the new person. First of all, we can read the planets and the signs that each planet are in, but then we can also read the way that the planets interact with each other. And the reason that we know that they're interacting with each other is based on degrees. If they are, it depends usually between about a 3 degree and a 10 degrees. If the planets are connected to each other, then, so for example, we talked about your sun and your moon. Your sun is at 0 degrees, your moon is at 3 degrees. They're really close to each other. They're within 3 degrees of each other. So that's a conjunction. So that brings in a whole other relationship to your chart. So you can get one astrology reading, or you can get 100, and you're still going to be getting new information because it is so multi-layered and such a vast map. But in a way, that's great because being human is not easy. It's not simplistic.
Yeah. Being human is multi-layered.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So keep going so let's talk about, rising sign. What does that mean?
Yeah. So the rising sign is where, what the sign that was on the horizon when you were born. And that is another point of identity, but it is more concerned with the way that we are perceived and the way that we show up. And it becomes like the bouncer at the door. Unlike the sun, the rising sign is very concerned with self-presentation, with being approved of, being accepted, being loved, being seen, all of these things. And so our rising sign can be completely different than our sun sign. And our rising sign is sort of like our mask or our facade. This is how I show up. This is how I present myself to the world. And so, for example, you have Leo rising. That's a fire sign. That is an outgoing fire sign. Leos tend to be very, wild and pleasurable and fun and sassy. And Leos are usually really fun to be around. They tend to be popular. They tend to be very well liked immediately. And, I've been working with you for a while and kind of following your stuff. And when I pulled up your chart and saw that you had Leo rising, I thought, of course she has Leo rising, right? It's this energy. It's this sense of energy that you bring to the table, this natural shine and exuberance. And are you relating to some of those descriptions that I'm giving you?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, certainly Scorpio I know is that my sun sign, and that's the one that I've often been, I'm intense and I'm passionate. And so
Yes.
I knew all of that, but the Leo rising sign is kind of new to me. So, but yes, I can relate to that. Sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we could say that what happens for you is that when you're in new situations with new people, that you present your Leo side first. So you show up and you're like, hi, I'm outgoing, I'm vibrant, I'm beautiful, I know how to make conversation, I'm shiny, I bring you joy, right? This is how you show up. Now, once people get to know you, then they begin to see more of your sun. And then they see that part of you that is very deep and that is almost shy sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And that wants to sit back and observe and can call people on their BS, right? Leo doesn't call people on their BS necessarily because Leo's like, hey, I'm here for the party, let's have fun. But then Scorpio is a completely different version. And so are you relating to some of this as I'm saying it?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. People often, especially when I was a drinker, not talking about astrology, but I thought I was an extrovert. I thought I was somebody who was incredibly extroverted. And really what I learned was that I was just somebody who didn't want to drink alone. So I would put myself, I could do it. I can definitely be the extroverted person, the life of the party girl, the socialite. I can do all of that. But if I'm being honest, and when I got sober, it was like, oh, I'm an introverted extrovert.
Yes.
Again, not looking at it from the astrological perspective, but just that feeling of I need to recharge alone, and I'm quiet and I am reserved and I am a bit shy, but I can certainly put myself out there, and I can do that when it's called for.
Yeah. Yeah. And with the rising sign, we use that sometimes as a way to cope with the world. So what you learned as a very young person is that you got more approval, accolades, support when you showed up as like pretty, smiley, outgoing. Even though it overrode your tendency to be more introverted and shy and want to hold back, you understood inherently that it was safer to show up and be smiley and bright and fiery.
150%. I mean, I know a lot of women can relate to this, but that concept of as a child, Sarah, smile,
Yeah.
And it was, oh, okay. I knew that I needed to behave that way. Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. And so then we are talking about the moon. So the moon then is another key player in this because the moon is about our emotional landscape and how we meet the world from an emotional perspective. And so for you have a Scorpio moon as well. So, for you, when it comes to emotions, they will take on, Scorpio is a water sign. Scorpio is very deep. Scorpio can be very shy, but also there's a sort of an intimacy that comes along with your ability to relate to your emotions of like, I don't want to just be superficial. I really want to understand them, and I want to figure out like what is the psychology behind them. And, you know, of course you're doing what you're doing. You know, of course you're working with people with, you know, there's a lot about sobriety with your work. There's a lot around body image and food. And, you know, Scorpio is one of the signs, speaking of really cool things that we can gather from an astrology chart, Scorpio is one of the signs that is associated with addiction. And part of that is because anytime that we're talking about depth and psychological inheritance and stuff that we don't want to feel, it's like, it's the murkiness of like, I don't want to feel that. I'm going to repress it. I'm going to get away from it. And so, you know, you with your story of this trajectory of, you know, being outgoing and wanting to, knowing that you had to, that was how you were going to connect with people, was to be outgoing. And at the same time, there's that sort of Scorpio underbelly of addiction. But then the rebirth of saying, this doesn't work for me anymore. I have to transcend this. And Scorpio is all about transformation, right? Bringing consciousness to the things that have been unconscious. So I see a lot of Scorpio when I'm working with clients who have struggled with addiction.
Either as their sun sign or as their rising sign?
It doesn't even have to be that. It can just show up, you know, in the same way that I see a lot of people that struggle with addiction with a lot of earth in their chart. And the reason, you know, water, all of the water signs, so that is Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. The water signs are all about emotions, and emotions are always very boundaryless and unpredictable. And a lot of times we don't want to feel, and we weren't taught in our family of origin how to feel. And so then we end up repressing in various ways. You know, sometimes we're using drugs and alcohol, sometimes we're scrolling, sometimes we're eating, sometimes we're getting super busy, and whatever it is. And then with the earth signs, and that is Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn, earth signs are very logic-based, and we tend to strive for perfection when we have a lot of earth in our chart. And so, you know, whether we're dealing with really deep, strong, sensitive emotions, we're psychically sensitive with the water signs, or we have these structures and these boundaries and these guidelines and a sense of perfection that we're trying to achieve, both of those elements in a chart can contribute to, if we are prone to addiction, can contribute to that, but can also just in general give us some really good work for, oh yes, this is a thing that happens for me. I get overwhelmed, or I, you know, schedule myself too much, and then I'm going crazy. And so there's a lot.
So you've talked about 2 of the elements. There are 4.
Yeah.
So elements is another part of reading an astrological chart. So we've talked water signs, earth signs, and then there's air and fire. So what are the air signs and what are the fire signs?
Yeah, so let's start with fire. So fire, Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius. So fire signs are the sign that's like going, doing, action. All of the fire, the beautiful thing about fire is that it is very much what you see is what you get. So Leo, your rising sign is a fire sign. Fire signs they don't care as much about saying the right thing or doing the right thing. They just kind of want to be out. They appreciate the attention. They appreciate being big and being hot. And, you know, Aries, if you know anybody that has a lot of Aries in their chart, Aries people oftentimes are, you know, announcing, they like to kind of battle, and they don't really care if people don't accept what they have to say. And I think Aries energy is really beautiful. Leo, of course, is the consummate artist, the performer, the actor, the actress. It's this beautiful, creative, aesthetic, you know, come look at me kind of energy. And then Sagittarius, and the sun is in Sagittarius right now. Sagittarius is full of wisdom. Sagittarius is a teacher. And so fire signs fire brings this lovely ability in our charts to move into action. And yeah, all of the elements have beautiful things about them and difficult things about them, but they all, yes, it's a whole other layer. And then air signs, that's the thinker, the intellectual, the always seeking out different concepts and wanting to understand, always looking to understand the world through the lens of the mind.
So,
and you know what? I didn't tell you let me tell you the air signs real quick. It's Gemini and Aquarius and Libra.
All right. Amazing. I love how it's just everything kind of layers on top of itself. And so do we all have elements of all of them? Or is it really like, for me, I've got this Scorpio with Leo rising, and my element is what am I? Water? Yes.
Your signature sign is Scorpio, so you have the most water in your chart.
But yeah, do we all kind of have some elements of all of them, or how does that work? And maybe what I'd love for you to do is maybe flip your screen so that people can see what a chart even looks like. And before anybody watching is, going to get nervous if you're looking at it and don't understand what it looks like. It looks like gibberish to a lot of us and really hard to understand, but maybe you can walk us through what a chart looks like and what it means. And then answer that question. Do we all have elements of all of the signs in us?
Okay. Yeah. So while I'm sharing my screen, I will describe that. So yes, we all have everything in our chart.
Okay.
Although, and this is your chart.
Okay.
Some of us have more. For example, these purple glyphs right down here, these are all Scorpio.
Glyphs are the symbols, GLYPH. Those are the symbols that we use for the different signs of the zodiac, so the different sun signs.
Yeah. So you have a lot of Scorpio. You have 5 Scorpio planets plus your nadir, and this is just one of the points in the chart that's important.
And you called that a nadir?
Uh-huh.
How do we spell that?
Nadir.
Nadir is a nadir. Okay.
Yeah. So, we all have Scorpio somewhere in our chart. You happen to have a lot of Scorpio. Whereas when we're talking about Aries, for example, and here's where Aries lands in your chart, you don't have any planets in Aries. And that doesn't mean that you don't have Aries influence. You do, especially in this part of your chart, but you have far more Scorpio. You have, 2 planets in Libra, for example, and you have 2 planets in Gemini. And so we all have everything.
But this means that my traits would really not be representative of Aries, because I wouldn't have a lot of those personality traits.
Right.
Okay.
Right. You might not relate to Aries very much. Although
and might that mean that I might not get along with Aries people very well?
Not necessarily, because all of the fire signs, for example, fire signs understand each other and get along with each other because they all have the same objective. They all understand, here, I know what motivates you. Because it motivates me too. I like attention. I like to be, I like a little bit of competition. I like to be physically active. I like to express what's on my mind. And you have Leo rising. And then you also have your Venus down here in Sagittarius, as well as Saturn.
What does my Venus in Sagittarius and Saturn mean?
Yeah.
And so also, can I just even say, I'm so sorry, I have so many questions. Sagittarius is not a planet.
Sagittarius is a sign. Saturn is a planet. Saturn is a planet, as is Venus.
But we're looking at them sort of in the same,
Well, for you, we were talking about planetary relationships earlier and degrees. So, I'm going to circle this as I'm talking because it might just be good for the visual. So here we're talking about this brown guy is Saturn. That's the glyph for Saturn. It kind of looks like a weird shape 5. And then this glyph is for Venus. And I think a lot of us recognize that because it's the symbol for female.
Yes.
Both of these planets for you land in the sign of Sagittarius. And this is the little Sagittarius glyph. And then your Saturn is at 13 degrees and your Venus is at 15 degrees. So that means that just like your sun and your moon, they're conjunct. They are in relationship with each other. Their energies get very merged. And, you know, like I said, there's a number of ways to interpret this, but, you know, your Venus, Venus, you know, speaking of archetypes, Venus is the archetype of, you know, the divine feminine, although men also have Venus in their charts too. It's where we are receptive. It's where we are attractive. It's where we attract people and things to us. Venus is also very much connected to our sense of self-worth, our sense of being resourced, whether we have what we need. And Venus is also a relationship planet and will tell us a lot about the kinds of relationships that we would do well to seek out, some of the potential difficulties with our relationships. Venus in relationship is very much about love and romance and sensuality. So a lot of the relationship components that we want, that feel good. And so this is Venus down here. That's the Venus archetype. Now, the fact that Saturn and Venus are connected, you know, Saturn brings in a sense of work and says, you know, this is something. And for example, Sarah, I hope this is okay if I share this, but all of those Venetian things that I just described to you, Saturn here in relationship to Venus says, those are things that you want. You want to feel beautiful and attractive, and you want to attract what you want towards you, and you want to feel resourced, and you want to, you know, have access to pleasure and really enjoy your life. You want those things. All of us do, but in particular, you want those things. But Saturn here, Saturn is an archetype of sometimes tradition, sometimes authority, sometimes career. And Saturn, whatever Saturn is connected to, says there's going to be a little bit of extra work involved. And, you know, in a way that's really beautiful for you. It's part of your life work is to figure out what brings me pleasure.
Honestly, yeah, maybe we can come, unless you want to keep describing.
No.
Yeah, come back to us. And I find that really interesting. And I hope the people watching aren't feeling like I'm just getting this amazing reading. And it's like, they're kind of like, this is really great, Sarah, but how does this relate to my life? But I feel like that's so important to know, because I am somebody that I definitely seek pleasure. I love, you know, things in life that are beautiful and meaningful. And for sure, I am somebody who feels like I have always had to work harder for the things that I've gotten at. Like, things have never come easily. And sometimes that can feel incredibly frustrating and feel like, you know, why for me is it like, why for some others does it seem like things come so easily and not for me? But I love that kind of validation that that's part of my journey.
Yeah. And, you know, when we're talking about career, it's like, and I always say this to people, like when we're going through your chart and we're noticing some of the places where there might be a rock, right? And you're sort of between a rock and a hard place, that ultimately what we're wanting to do is we're wanting to learn the lessons of this rock, because for you, you're wanting to teach other people how to deal with their own rocks. And that's what you do. So every bit, and you already know this, every bit of your experience that you've had that has led you to right here, coaching, TV program, podcasting, all of this beautiful, writing a book, all of this beautiful information and support that you bring out into the world, that's this right here. This is an indication of the fact that you're really meant to be doing what you're doing. So you probably already know that. You don't need that validation, but it's right here.
Oh, well, it's always nice to have that kind of validation. So let's come back to our faces so that we can see, so that our viewers can see us. And that's what I think is so special about what you do, is that you not only validate people on their current path, but you can also help them to see some pitfalls that might be ahead, or be able to, again, just raise their awareness around their experience so that they can maybe make different decisions that will lead them to greater joy and ease and happiness in their life and peace.
Yeah, I think that it's really easy to get caught up in the self-blame of feeling like, you know, that was such a bad decision. I can't believe I did that. Or never expected this to happen. You know, when I got my first astrology reading, I was just beginning to embark on a divorce. And I was just beating myself up relentlessly because I couldn't believe it. This was not supposed to happen to me. This was not my life path. And I had a reading, and she softened me. She softened that point of view. And she said, you know, this is it's okay. You know, of course, something like this might have shown up for you. And I will tell you that you're going to look back on it and you're going to be really grateful. And she's so right. You know, that was 10 years ago. And I absolutely can't see my life having done anything other than that. And, you know, thank you. Now I don't have to, you know, I still had to work through the drama and the trauma of having to go through that. But I really see the bigger picture, and astrology helped me to do that.
What a beautiful healing tool astrology can be.
Yes.
Because I think so many of us have that experience where we're in the crisis. Me with my rock bottom moment, sitting in the backseat of a police cruiser handcuffed, was my rock bottom moment. And yours is going through this divorce, you know, one of your moments anyway. And it's like we can be in that and thinking this is the worst thing ever. And I can't believe this is happening to me. And there's nothing worse than this. And then we've got that beautiful hindsight later. What I think astrology might be able to do for people is, and again, just the work that I do, which is just always raising our awareness, to know that inside these deep, hard, awful moments, there is something better inside. There's a lesson in there. And we have to go through these hard times to be able to experience those greater transformations, those epiphanies, or those, you know, changes in trajectory that our lives were meant to go on. And it's all for the greater good. It's all meant to be there for us. But I know that when we're going through it, anybody that's going through a crisis right now, you know, you just feel like it's the worst thing, and you just don't see any kind of blessing. And you kind of get frustrated when people want to say, see the silver lining. It's like, I don't want to see a silver lining. There's no silver lining to this. It's the worst thing ever. But I think almost in so many cases, you know, if we can come out and through, we can look back and say, thank God that happened. You know, that I'm so grateful for that to have come into my life, because now look where I am compared to where I was. So I think it's just a fabulous, I think astrology is just another fabulous tool that is, it's really rooted in, I mean, I guess, would we call it in science? But I mean, I see how that all works. And when looking at my, my chart, I mean, this is really scientific. Like, this is really, you know, very, you can't dispute it. Like, my sun was there, the moon was there. Like, these are not things that we can argue.
Yeah. Astronomically, it's very specific. And then when we're looking at it astrologically, it's all about the interpretation. I mean, there are, of course, you know, pretty specific guidelines for how to interpret Venus, for example. But, you know, it's an archetype that we could just go mining for and finding more and more and more. And so it is in the interpretation, which is why it's important to find an astrologer that you like. You don't want to have an astrologer that is going to interpret Venus in a way that doesn't make sense to you or that's not relevant to you.
Mm-hmm. So I think that's kind of the big takeaway, is just really have resonance with the person that you've decided to have a reading with. And if you really don't agree with anything that they're saying, you really don't feel a connection with them, then it's time to move on and go with another astrologer that you do feel that connection with. Because again, like you said, there's a lot of science and a lot of art to this. There's a lot of room for interpretation. So we have to make sure that we're with somebody that we really feel, you know, has our best interest and is really there for us and is really on our team, helping us to understand it better.
Yeah.
And ourselves better.
You know, I would say that it is, if you want to understand your astrology chart a little bit better without getting a professional reading, I always recommend getting at least one professional reading, because that will blow your mind in ways that Google searching won't. But you can go to astro.com. You can get a free natal chart that shows you where your sun and your moon and all of your planets are. And then you can do a little bit of Google research. You know, I would suggest starting with your sun, your moon, and your rising, and just read and kind of get an idea for how the information that you find resonates. And so, you know, yes, astrology is intimidating. You're not going to learn it all at once. Don't even try. But you can start to get little pieces. And I read for a lot of people that have done a lot of self-study. So they know a lot. And then they get into a reading and it's like suddenly all of the pieces are getting put together and the puzzle begins to really open up for them. So, whether you get a reading tomorrow or in 2 years, you'll trust your intuition, but you can begin to do a little bit of investigation of your own just to kind of dabble if you wanted to do that.
I love that. I think that's a great introduction. So astro.com. And then are there any books, resources? I know there was something called The Only Astrology Book You'll Ever Need by, I forget her name, but are there any resources that you recommend for people that are saying, okay, I want to do my own research first? What do you recommend?
Well, it's funny that you ask because I happen to have one of my favorite books right here. It's called The Inner Sky, and it's by Stephen Forrest. He is an evolutionary astrologer, and that is the kind of astrology that I do too, which is where you are really using astrology more as an emotional toolkit for what has been, what is now, and what will be. He has a beautiful way of writing. I have an astrology podcast that is where I'm talking to people. I have some teaching, right? If you wanted to learn about Sagittarius, for example, what the sun in Sagittarius means. But then there's also, I'm interviewing people that have a lot of Sagittarius, for example, in their chart. And that's a really nice way to kind of get some perspective. And yeah, I think.
What's the name of your podcast so people can follow it?
Yeah, it's called Star Narratives.
Amazing. On iTunes, Spotify, all the usuals.
It's everywhere. You can find it on my website, nathacampanella.com. So
awesome.
But yeah, find Instagram astrologers and, it'll start showing up. Once you decide that you're interested, you'll start seeing astrology everywhere.
I love it. I should have asked this question earlier, but I'm wondering if you can, in a few words, give us the sort of Cole's notes, if you will, of each of the sun signs. So what, when we think of the Sagittarius, what do we think of? When we think of Libra, what comes up? Just a brief little description of what you see most often with those signs.
Yeah, so I'll start with Aries because that's the first sign in the zodiac. Aries is fire. It's about moving into action, decisiveness, will, and war and anger. So Mars is the planet that rules Aries. All of those in our chart direct us and show us how we have those things, will, anger, how we move into action. Taurus is next. Taurus is an earth sign. Taurus is about security, resources, pleasure, and how we relate to those things in our life. So with every single sign talks about how we relate to XYZ in our lives. The third one is Gemini. That's an air sign. Gemini is connection, talking to people, communicating with people, gathering information. And then after that, we have Cancer. Cancer is a water sign. Cancer is deep emotions. Cancer, we're very motherly. We tend to people. We caretake other people. And then let's see, Leo is next. Leo is fire. Leo loves attention. And Leo is our inner, like I said, artist, our inner performer, our inner, look at me, look at how amazing I am. And then we have Virgo. Virgo is earth. Virgo is our go-getter. Virgo is very efficient and opinionated and sees things through a black and white perspective, but is really good at organizing, getting things done. And then we have Libra. Libra is air. And Libra is about how we do relationship, where we become the peacekeeper. Libra doesn't like conflict, by the way. Aries likes conflict. Libra doesn't. And those two are across from each other in the zodiac. So they're in relationship too. But Libra is about the things that we go looking for in a partner that we feel that maybe we don't have in ourselves. And then Scorpio, of course, water. And Scorpio is about the mystery, the parts of ourselves that are unconscious that we ultimately want to bring up to the surface so that we can see them and understand them better. And let's see, Sagittarius is next. Sagittarius is fire. Sagittarius is our teacher, the wisdom gatherer, the part of us that tells stories and regales the room and just has wisdom and information to sort of send to the masses. And then we have Capricorn, and Capricorn is earth. Capricorn is the boss, the CEO. With our inner Capricorn, we are very organized. We are logical. We are very based in integrity. And we are governed. We self-govern with Capricorn. And then Aquarius is air, and Aquarius is the rebel. Are the parts of us that say, no, I'm not going to do that. That doesn't make sense. I want to innovate. I want to be different. I have to reform whatever is here. And then finally, the very last one is Pisces. And Pisces is a water sign. And Pisces is about our inner mystic, our relationship to spirit, our relationship to fantasy and imagination and things that are invisible. Also our psychic sensitivities. So that's all 12 of those. And those, of course, are nutshell versions. But you can see as I went through that they kind of cover like all of these really key parts of who we are and what we're doing in our humanness.
And again, I think what's really interesting is we have all elements of all of them in us, but of course, whatever our sun sign is and our rising sign, that's where, we can really get into the nuances of our personality and the experiences that we've had in our lives. And like you talk about the emotional component and how we can really look towards, maybe making changes in the future based on this information, knowing how we are and how we perceive things and how we receive things and how we behave can really change the way that we do things in the future. So I think that, no need for thinking that, astrology is just woo-woo. It's, I think that's really gone by the wayside. I think more and more people are more interested in learning about it and understanding it better and seeing the validity in it. And because of people like you that can really break it down and make it really seem tangible. I think instead of this idea, that it really can sometimes feel a bit woo-woo when we read about it or hear about it, you're really bringing it down to a real world level that we can use as a tool in our toolbox. Quickly, before I let you go, tell people, first of all, how can they find you? Where's the best place to find you? I know we talked about your podcast, but tell us that. And so start with that.
Yeah, so you can find me on my website at nathacampanella.com. And I'm on Instagram every day at Natha_Campanella_astrology. And I'm on Facebook too, but I just like Instagram more. So I'm there far more often. And, I have a number of ways to work with me. Deeper work where we're working together more long-term. I think I told you this before we started, but I was a life coach for many years before I became an astrologer. And, all the way to like a single personal private reading where we just get to jump in and focus on whatever is up for you in your life. Maybe you're trying to change your career. Maybe you have questions about your relationship. Maybe you just want to know, like, give me the overview of my blueprint. And there are a lot of ways. And then, I have a lot of just free astrological content that is made specifically for education. So come check me out.
Beautiful. Well, I know people are going to be doing that. Certainly, they already are. You're one of the most well-known astrologers that I've ever heard of. You're incredible. Your work is amazing. Keep doing it because it's needed. Very quickly, everybody talks about Mercury going retrograde or in retrograde or out of retrograde. I don't even know. Tell us what that means. Tell us why all of a sudden it's becoming buzzword everywhere. Has it been happening through history, which I imagine it has been? Can you just tell us what it means and if it has validity and why everyone says that, they're messing up everything in their life and it's because Mercury's in retrograde? It's like I'm hearing it every other day. Tell us your thoughts on Mercury in retrograde.
Yeah, so Mercury is the planet that rules the signs of Gemini and Virgo. So Mercury rules communication, the way that we have conversations with people, the way that we connect with people. And then Mercury also rules our Virgo side, which is the side that is busy and perfectionistic and wants to make order out of chaos. So a planet in retrograde, the planets are always moving. They're moving in a counterclockwise motion in the sky. Occasionally they appear from our perspective on Earth to start moving backward. And that is called
but
retrograde.
they're not moving backward.
They're not.
It's like as if when, forgive me if I'm telling this wrong, but is it like when we're driving and you look out the window when you're a kid and you're thinking the tires on the car beside you look like they're going they're going backwards? Is it that kind of thing? Everyone's still moving forward, but it has the appearance of moving backwards.
Exactly. It has the appearance of moving backward. And when a planet is in retrograde and appearing to move backward, astrologically, what that means is that we on Earth have to go back over our old ground in our lives and revisit, revise. We have to kind of go back. So for example, with Mercury being a planet of communication, and this is one of the reasons why people hate Mercury retrograde so much, is because you have to go back and you have to look at like, how has my communication been? Have I been clean with my communication? Have I been not saying what I am needing to say? Have I been screaming at people when I need to just sit down and have all of these myriad of ways that we communicate in dysfunction? Mercury retrograde will bring that up. So we end up having people that show back up, maybe old relationships that we have to get closure with, maybe old problems that kind of resurface of like, okay, I guess I really need to have like an honest conversation with this person. I was trying to brush it under the rug, but it won't go away. And so, Mercury goes retrograde about 3 times a year, and it goes retrograde in a specific sign. So this last Mercury retrograde was in the sign of Scorpio, which felt particularly hard because Scorpio, as we talked about, is the stuff that we may have repressed. It's unconsciousness. So all of us are having these situations show up that we're like, oh, I didn't want to deal with that person, and here they are. And I think that's why. And then, Mercury is also connected to electronics. And so people say, electronic stuff goes wonky, and sometimes it does, but it's not a huge deal. I mean, for me, I never want to, trash talk Mercury retrograde, like, oh, we can blame all of our problems on Mercury retrograde. I don't think it's like that. I think that it's about, it's a really good opportunity to take responsibility and like clean it up. So then we can move forward and not have all this baggage of poor communication behind us. Did that answer your question?
It definitely did. And I also like that the language of it is Mercury retrograde, not Mercury in retrograde or going retrograde. It's just Mercury retrograde.
It can be all of those.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But really the core message here is use it, if you choose to, as an opportunity to look at how things are going in your life, especially as it relates to communication and the way that you're interacting with the people and relationships in your life.
Yep. Perfect.
Beautiful. Amazing. Well, this has been so much fun. I could talk to you for 100 years. Thank you, Natha, so much for being with me today. I know that you've helped a lot of people and at least demystified astrology a little bit for all of us. So thank you again for being with me. I really loved our time.
Thank you for inviting me. This was great. I loved getting to talk to you.
Me too. Thank you so much. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, bye.